This is Kang Hanbit. He had a mission given to him by a naughty goddess. However, he has already died 55 times. At least he always reincarnates. In all those lives, he even served in the army several times. But what would happen if a guy like that entered an online game and started live streaming? He not only makes bold bets with his audience, but also insults them brutally. He assaults NPCs, tricks other players, and always hangs out with his friend, Gay. He somehow manages to exploit the game and obtain such an absurdly overpowered epic skill that everyone starts talking about it on the forum. And he even manages to win over a very beautiful NPC. But of course, when his mother pulls the internet cable and he is forced to log out of the game, his audience mocks him just like anywhere else. You're losing aura because of your mom. When he logs back in, the chat is already going crazy wanting to know about the epic skill. His viewership has exploded, but now I'm going to tell the story from the beginning, because of course there's also some context behind this game.
Why are you gay?
The mission to save that world from death was given by a goddess to a chosen one, so he tried his best to achieve this goal. Apparently the fight was finally over, but everyone had disappeared. It was possible to observe trails of red liquid all over the floor of the place. The exhaustion was evident in the boy's eyes, who couldn't even move. His only desire was to rest a little, and just like that, he passes away. Kang Hanbit's numbers of regression, possession, and reincarnation were extremely high. He could no longer stand that endless cycle which had already reached 55 attempts. Probably another loop of pain and suffering would begin. At that moment, the goddess told Hanbit that that attempt had been quite long. She wanted to switch to reincarnation, but the boy had already had enough of it all. That expressionless living being was actually a goddess who had kidnapped the guy to that despicable place. He didn't remember exactly everything that had happened, but the goddess, after kidnapping him, threw him into another world, telling him to find a certain airport and save him from danger. And so this endless hell of agonizing deaths began. But in any case, he couldn't find a single clue as to what that word meant. Thus, Hanbit loses his temper and tells the goddess herself to go find that thing on her own. But that was impossible for her, as it would result in the destruction of the entire world. After hearing the boy's argument, the lady comments that his physical and mental restoration was working perfectly. Either way, she wasn't wrong. After all, whenever Hanbit returned to that place, his body and mind were instantly healed. But the agonizing memories still remained, destroying his sanity, and the accumulated trauma pushed him to the limit. As if that weren't enough, the goddess asks once again if she could start a new regression. Once again, she doesn't understand the irony in the boy's answer, and replies in a silly way. Suddenly, she says she is joking and leaves Hanbit quite confused. He had worked hard to fulfill the mission, and because of that, he received the right to return to his original world. Even after failing several times, he learned from the journey and didn't need to worry anymore. Therefore, the goddess would send him back home. Still quite confused, the boy asks her to wait because he still had several questions to ask. Hanbit was used as an object by the goddess, but in exchange he would be rewarded with a great power, and she was eager to see what he would do there. Out of nowhere, Hanbit wakes up with his mother letting him know she was going to work. Little by little, he gets up, quite weakened due to the hangover. 18 months had already passed since he returned to the real world. After so much time reliving the regressions, his memories had become muddled, but they were starting to come back little by little. The goddess had kidnapped him the day before his military enlistment, and so 18 months passed, and he had been discharged the day before. Just thinking about it made Hanbit really angry. If he counted all the times he had served in the military during his past lives, this was already his 6th time. Thanks to the goddess, Hanbit was failing to adapt to modern life and was going through various difficulties, even coming to fear his future. After a while of resting and lamenting, he decides it's time to act upon. Checking his cell phone, Hanbit realizes that his friend was inviting him out to drink once again. He replies saying that he is too old for this overly youthful routine. After this reply, his friend begins a series of teasing remarks, but in a way Hanbit had a fondness for the guy who had helped him when he was thrown into the military. Suddenly, the guy informs him that he didn't want to drink that day because he had a present to give him. With this, the boy becomes quite curious about what this gift could be, and decides to go meet the guy. Zhu Yanwu had been his senior in the military for 4 months, despite being 5 years younger. Already at the table in the ice cream parlor, the two talk about physical conditioning after exhausting activities, but what interested Hanbit the most at that moment was the gift, and there was nothing there so far. So, Hyung stands up from the table with the intention of leaving, thinking that it was all nothing but a lie. His friend stops him and mentions the game Record Project, with a level 2 card in his hand. With this gift, he could get the VR equipment and play at home using incredible synchronization. It cost around 5 million won, but for Hyung, it was completely free. Then the boy seems to refuse the gift, as he had to work hard due to the situation he was currently in. Making money was Hyung's priority, and he couldn't waste his time playing games. Playing and having fun didn't put food on the table, and the priority until then was something else. While having his hair pulled by Hyung, Ju informs him that depending on how he played, he could even get rich. The boy could earn hundreds of millions just by having fun, according to him. After hearing this, Hyung stops his tasteless fooling around to pay closer attention and apologizes to his friend. According to Ju, the developer of RP was a well-known team, and the will of the founder Michael Welton was revealed. causing a huge uproar. He would give all the rights to the first player to beat the game, and this fueled the competition, making the value of the virtual currency skyrocket. And the strategy guides that actually helped players beat the game were being sold for whatever price the sellers wanted. Even huge conglomerates were investing heavily to form dedicated teams. But this didn't mean that solo players were out of the question. After so much insistence, Hyung agrees to embark on this endeavor with his friend, who becomes very enthusiastic. Without hesitation, he decides that this was the right time to put the plan into action. Upon arriving at the location, Hyung is overwhelmed by the sheer number of people there. First of all, they needed to buy a beginner's guide. The protagonist was quite clueless about the subject, and the RP was unforgiving to beginners. For this reason, a player named Adventurer A wrote a beginner's guide that proved to be quite useful at that stage of the game. Encouraged by his senior, Hyung agrees to buy the book, but first decides to take a look at its content. Suddenly he is startled by something. The goddess was whispering in his ear at that moment, saying she was anxious to see his next steps. The mission would probably be, once again, to try and find airport. Hyung didn't understand what all of that meant and why the goddess had let him go. She had never wanted to release the kid from that hell, but suddenly she changed her mind. While holding the book and thinking about all this, Hyung is called by his friend. He was very quiet and thoughtful because he had a question to ask. He wanted to know if Ju had any information about a supposed Team Zero. Everyone knew of this group, but no one really knew anything about them. Their CEO handled all public affairs alone, and the number of employees was confidential information. Hyung finds this quite suspicious, and even correlates these facts with the goddess. According to him, the world she had sent him to wasn't a simple game. The disgusting feeling of taking a life for the first time was real, and felt firsthand. Hyung was afraid to return to a place that could be the same hell, as the despair of repeating that life endlessly was still engraved in his mind. But either way, this was the only way to end this torment. Then Hyung asks his friend how long it would take to get the accessories with that amulet. Ju replies that they deliver on the same day, and that he needed the protagonist's phone to download some apps. Now it was almost mandatory for Hyung to buy that book since he had completely crumpled it. Ju then says goodbye to the boy and promises to wait for him to start. Thinking about the accessories, Hyung just says he will try to be as fast as he can. Upon arriving home, the protagonist notices that the box had finally arrived. Inside that small package was a video game console of exorbitant value. Quite eager, Hyung starts tinkering with all the equipment inside. He still had a little time before his mother arrived, so he decides to test the thing out. After putting on all the technological equipment, Hyung lies down on the bed to start the process. Suddenly, several windows appear, and the boy realizes that everything is very realistic. Seeing that the settings window didn't appear, Hyung decides to restart the simulator, believing it was all just a bug. Upon clicking the system button, several disturbing failure messages appear and launch the game. Suddenly, Hyung finds himself in a completely different place. It had been a long time since he last set foot in the port city of Edlin. Noticing a window there, the protagonist approaches to see his reflection. He then realizes that he looked exactly as he did in his final regression. As he rubs his hand over his face, his hands are painted red as if it were some sort of hidden message from the goddess, and it probably told him to start over. Suddenly, a panel appears with messages from a player. Thus, Hyung realizes that it was his friend's username. Finally, this loper appears, and the protagonist recognizes his partner. Hyung is then questioned for not customizing his avatar and says it was an accident. Another thing that wasn't right was the protagonist's username. Upon opening his character information, he realizes he was named Black Dragon. Loper laughs hard at this silly and embarrassing nickname. Hyung hadn't chosen that name, but he couldn't change it ever again because it was directly linked to his biometric information, and he had to accept that fact. He couldn't stand that idiot laughing at the situation anymore, and promptly decides to go check those notifications. There was a proposal for Loper to broadcast his gameplay live using the game's integrated recorder. The blonde would be the host, and Hyung just needed to play to keep up to 60% of the profits if the streams went viral. Having no other options, the protagonist finds himself forced to accept this proposal. Loper just wanted his friend to trust the process. Thus, the blonde starts the broadcast by introducing the duo to the live stream. In the comments, people heavily mocked the name Black Dragon and completely belittled the user. They were doing that to irritate Hyung, but his friend wanted him to just focus on making money at that moment. So the protagonist stops caring about the haters and decides to take a step forward in the game. At that moment, he needed to choose 3 skills and hoped to get the powers he had mastered in his various regressions. Loper, in turn, was quite excited to see the system's choices. After Hyung clicks on the card, a massive flash of light takes over the place. After that, the two stare at it for a few seconds without understanding absolutely anything, while the curious viewers wouldn't stop commenting in the stream's chat. The two stared at that information open-jawed, especially Loper, and the viewers couldn't believe the protagonist's sheer luck, accusing him of hacking. No one could understand how Hyung had done that, not even himself. Completely clueless, he even starts to think that there was something wrong with his power. With a euphoric look on his face, Loper says that that skill was a hidden one, and there wasn't just 1 or 2 of them. What had happened was almost impossible, and no one besides the blonde believed in those unprecedented icons. While Lopper was euphoric showing this to the followers, Hyung recognized some of the skills that would suffice for a start. He would use them as a boost to improve, as well as to discover the differences between the world he knew and this place, since this was likely connected to the goddess. Then the protagonist decides to start with fire magic, since it was the most basic one. After that, he asks Lopper where the duo would get their quests. Seeing that his friend would choose the magic skill, the blonde gets a bit worried. At that moment, the chat was criticizing the boy's foolish decision, which was getting on his nerves. According to Lopper, the most important thing in that game was proficiency, and because of that, magic became a difficult skill to master compared to the others. Furthermore, a little star would appear when the player maximized their proficiency, but until then, there was no way to check the accumulation. Hyung remembered this very well and knew he would need to put an effort to learn something new. Among them, magic was the most difficult and required choosing a good teacher. By asking about the choice of a master, Hyung leaves his friend a bit confused. Being a layman, the protagonist thought he would have someone to teach him the magic tricks. Noticing the viewer's negative reaction in the chat, Lopper asks for patience, so he explains that the player would earn a book that allowed the learning of skills once quests were completed. The protagonist soon finds this solution much more convenient than the other, because in the past he had gone through very difficult situations with the arrogant instructor. By calling his friend to go to the central shop, Hyung leaves him perplexed for knowing about it. There he could buy fire magic from a swindler merchant named Julio. Since they had no choice and needed the book, that was the only alternative. But Hyung didn't trust the swindler, who ran scams on every sale. Amused by seeing the protagonist freak out, a viewer makes a donation, and Lopper thanks them quite happily. Hyung had also earned 500 won from that donation and seemed quite impacted seeing things work out. Anyway, at that stage of the game, a mere 1,000 won wasn't much. But any amount was welcome, and Hyung even jokes about his friend's life not being worth even that sum. Finally, they decide to go to Julio to get the fire magic. After calling out to the protagonist, Lopper notices strange behavior from him. Then Hai reveals he wants to find a magic master. There on the panel, he finds one named Atsolal, and Lopper gives him some advice, thinking it was all just flirting. According to the information, this girl was just a quest NPC who robbed players and vanished in the blink of an eye, taking advantage of her beauty. Even so, Hairu decides to go to Atsolal to see if it was all actually true. The chat's reaction to this decision is instantaneous, and the protagonist becomes very thoughtful. Thus, he changes his mind and decides to go to Julio, taking the route suggested by the crowd. Seeing that they manage to persuade the boy, the chat goes wild, and Hairu accepts their new embarrassing challenge. Finally, the two decide to move on, but the protagonist is questioned about the shortcut he chose to take. Lopper seemed to trust his friend, who was just following the roads by instinct. Finally, they arrive at the location and spot this Julio guy, which makes Hairu clench his fists. Horrible memories were rushing back at that moment. Upon asking about the NPCs, Hairu learns that things were quite unrestricted. Suddenly, the protagonist seems to get very enraged and storms right into the shop. Acting quite innocent, the shopkeeper welcomes the customer, but is immediately pinned down by him and questioned about his shady deals. From the store's doorway, Lopper watched everything in disbelief at the Black Dragon's actions. Julio seems not to understand what was happening and begged to be let go. After this scare, the boy finally lets him go. Thus, the merchant gets a chance to apologize, saying he had just sold the last book recently, but could recommend another shop in exchange for a favor. While Julio was distracted, a thief had supposedly entered his shop. In his view, this seemed like the work of his rival merchant named Atsolal, and he needed help to arrest her. The protagonist's new quest was to recover the stolen money bag and capture the culprit. But he probably wouldn't accept this proposal, which seemed like a complete lie. Atsolal was his true mentor, but because he had trained with her, he was sent to prison during his first playthrough. Because of planted evidence and bribed soldiers, any defense was useless against the theft charges. If he completed the quest, Hairu would get a spellbook, and the thief would never leave prison again. Furthermore, Atsolal would be held responsible for all the crimes involving the shop. Julio was hoping the protagonist would accept the proposal, but he simply walks right past him towards the merchandise. Suddenly, Hairu starts trashing the entire store, making Julio and Lopper desperate. Then he grabs a bag of money and tells the scammer to shut up. That was the proof that this guy was lying about the robbery. The quest now was to arrest the scammer Julio, and the reward would be 500 gold coins. Realizing he was found out, the merchant turns red with anger, telling the protagonist to get out of his store, and the viewers are left astonished by the revelation. Without thinking twice, Hairu kicks the liar right in the face, sending him flying. While the crowd argues in the chat, a rather angry soldier enters the shop. As the cutscene plays out, the scammer can be seen being taken away by the guards and arrested, swearing he hadn't done anything. Thus, Hairu realizes the difference between a game and the parallel world, because back then he had to fight the bribed guards and hand Julio over to someone trustworthy. Suddenly, the system panel appears, informing him that a new quest would be unlocked when the player traveled to Atsollal's general store. While Hairu was almost certain that this wasn't a mere coincidence, Lopper was calling out to him euphorically, demanding explanations for what just happened. Soon, the protagonist decides to make up something to tell his bro. According to Hairu, this plot was very similar to a novel's, and that's why he took the risk. Fortunately, Loper believes the story, since his friend used to talk about this all the time in the army. Suddenly, an anonymous user donates 10,000 won, and the blonde jumps for joy. He then takes the opportunity to hype up his partner, who was great at deductions, and this makes the viewers stop trash-talking him. For Hairu, streaming was proving to be a crazy experience, and he just wanted to stick to the good parts, leaving all that stuff entirely to Loper. Finally, they arrive at the shop, and the blonde realizes that Atsolblal was a very well-connected NPC. She was being treated like a criminal by the majority of the players in a very unjust manner, but to Hairu, she was a good person. A long time ago, the protagonist used to ask the young woman for work. Out of kindness, she gave the slacker an opportunity to start doing some tasks around the shop. Even with her rough tone, Atsobal seemed to care about the boy. One day, she handed him a book and recommended that he study magic to move up in life. Unfortunately, Atsobal ended up getting arrested, but she never blamed the boy and promised to take revenge on the damn rat who did this. She said that and then ended up burning to death, becoming a precious yet painful memory for the protagonist. After having these memories and getting lost in thought, Haim finally gathers the courage to enter the store. He immediately comes face to face with the girl, who looks somewhat sad. Upon seeing him, she is surprised to notice a new face around there. She then asks if this boy knew who he was talking to. Haim says he is a newbie, and that he came all the way there to learn magic from her. Atsobal resists this request because she had no reason to teach someone she didn't even know. Watching this scene, the viewers were euphoric, and Haim already had a plan to bypass this situation. Suddenly, the girl recognizes that this boy was actually the so-called Black Dragon. Haim claims to be the boy who took down the scammer, Julio, who had tried to frame her. Atsobal knew that this man was a piece of trash and that he would cause trouble, so the girl thanks the boy because, thanks to him, she got out of a very complicated situation. The protagonist is happy with this gratitude, especially since he hated the guy too. Julio looked like a scammer, and it was possible to tell just by looking at his face. Then Atsobal returns to the topic of teaching magic to Haim, but he interrupts her before she can continue. Out of nowhere, he asks if she was looking for a cure. He knew this because he had seen some papers on her desk and intended to help her. Haim was quite confident and understood a fair amount about medicine. Then Atsobal asks what the name of the disease was that caused blue pupils, accompanied by dizziness and vomiting. Unfortunately, the protagonist cannot answer this complex question. Haim had no idea how many times the poor girl had been deceived. Those people who called themselves experts were all the same, wasting the girl's time and money on a meaningless diagnosis just to take advantage of her innocence. She had already gone through a cycle of getting her hopes up only to have them crushed. Young knew that healing potions did not work in this case, and the patient probably didn't feel hungry either. Upon hearing this information, Atsobal's hands even began to tremble. According to Hyung, the disease had no name, but he knew how to cure it. Then Atsobal begs for help and promises to reward the boy for it. The protagonist only wanted her trust, as he had the perfect medicine for the disease. Thus, a new quest with the objective of finding the perfect medicine in Edlin appears. To Loper, this didn't even make sense, because a guaranteed epic was simply absurd. But Hyung didn't even know what that was. The blonde guy had to explain things to him since he didn't understand much due to being a newbie. It was easier to think of the ranks as a level combined with a rarity grade, and even for level 1 spellbooks, the performances changed based on this aspect. With this, Hyung realizes that the spell guide could perform differently in practice. While the boy thought that this didn't exist in the other world, Loper asked about how they were going to find the medicine. Soon, the protagonist comes to the conclusion that he would need to use it on himself to see how good an epic grade would be. Just when he was finally about to say where they needed to go, Hyung feels a sharp pain in his chest. Loper immediately gets very worried about this situation. All of this was Hyung's mother's fault, and out of nowhere he starts to disappear from the place, leaving his friend alone. Back at home, he plays it cool, telling his mother that he had something important to do. The old lady shows an indescribable expression for a few moments, but soon she starts hitting the kid because the door was locked. Then Hyung begins to explain that he had received a military discharge gift from Yeon and was just testing it out. Finally, the old lady begins to understand that it was all just a game. She knew about the subject because she saw it on the news all the time, and simply asks him not to play too much. Relieved, Hyung states that he would only play in his free time, since his internship would start the next day. The woman is surprised to learn that her son went ahead with this idea, and once again she slaps him a few times for only finding out about it now. Unfortunately, Hyung blocks one of his mother's slaps and mocks her. After that, he takes a much harder one straight to the face. No parent liked their child getting a job right after leaving the army, and this justified the old lady's fury. Hyung argued that he needed to get a job as quickly as possible because as soon as he returned to school, he would start his graduation semester. Since the company was in Songdo, the boy would have to wake up very early to go, and his mother didn't want him skipping breakfast to work. By saying that he had eaten a parfait as a snack, the boy makes his mother even angrier and runs to his room to save himself from more slaps. Finally, he sits on his bed to go back to playing. The next day, he would need to start working, so he would have to go to sleep early. Now Hyung felt bad for Hyung. At that moment, Jae Kim, who was an employee of the PR department, was reading some comments about the hidden quest and couldn't seem to believe it. That always surprised him, but the random Loper caught his attention. Soon he discovers that the Black Dragon was teaming up with this guy and even mocks him, saying he could smell Cheetos coming from that pathetic name. Anyway, he decides to go check the events in person. Inside the game, Loper was a bit nervous and asked his viewers to calm down. He was trying at all costs to explain the gank his friend had suffered from his mom. Suddenly, the blonde notices an extraordinary spike in the view charts. He didn't understand what was happening while the audience clamored for entertainment. Then Loper notices that a post about them had recently gone viral in the RPG. After a few moments, Hyung sends a message informing him that he wouldn't return to the game but would leave a good tip. Loper soon communicates this to the chat, leaving the poor guys euphoric. According to the Black Dragon, the trigger for Atsubel's quest could be obtained from the bomb slimes, and if his friend managed to get it, he would share even more special information. The very next day, Hyung arrives at the building of the company he would be working for. He constantly tried to encourage himself. Then he arrives at an office that was in chaos, trying to introduce himself to those present. Soon, an old man notices his presence and complains about HR because of it. Thus, he orders Lee Min-ho to take the intern to the conference room immediately. The boy, without hesitation, makes himself available to the newbie with an extremely tired expression. Hyung was supposed to leave his bag there and follow him to see his workplace. Lee then asks the protagonist to erase the whiteboard. Suddenly, a man arrives there asking why it was just the two of them today and who this newbie was. That was the team leader, and Lee had already mentioned that intern to him a few days ago. Like a good employee, Hyung promises to do his best in the internship, but the boss didn't really care and just wanted him to do what he was told. And when he finished, he could take off. Hyung could see the future of this company and would have to learn as much as possible to manage to stay there for a long time. Finally, he returns to the game and explains that his first day at work was chaotic. Loper said he understood his friend and looked at him with a very suspicious expression. Suddenly, he starts shouting, saying that the plan had worked and the number of viewers was now over 5,000. He wanted to start Atsubel's quest because no one had succeeded up to that point. Then Hyung mocks the guy's imagination, which was not creative at all, leaving the chat worked up. First, the protagonist decides to go to the main gate, but beforehand, he invites the whole livestream to accompany him. Loper doubted that his friend was a real noob, but he always got the same response. Hyung just thought that anything became possible in a game with so much freedom. Suddenly, they come across a massive argument. Most of the players were there after seeing the new post on the forum. Then someone shouts announcing that the Vanguard had arrived at the location. Soon it is possible to see this group of people walking by as if they owned everything. Loper, upon seeing the Vanguard, realizes that his friend's discovery has reached far and wide. But Hyung didn't even know who this group of people was. So the blonde explains that the top 10,000 in the rankings were called the Vanguard. Levels, proficiency, progression, and things like that were used to determine the ranking. And out of 300 million players worldwide, those were on the podium, and only 500 were Korean. Hyung is impressed to learn that these guys didn't know magic because they had prioritized other things. On the back of one of the guys was a weapon made by an artisan with good skills, called the Golden Bird Bow. Those people couldn't find Atsubel's quest, but most of them belonged to corporations. They received corporate backing to finish the game, generating a lot of money in the RPG. Suddenly someone approaches them, saying "Excuse me" to the protagonist. It was a young woman wanting to know the secrets to completing the quest that Hyung had promised on the stream. Then a pushy guy interrupts the conversation to contradict the girl who trusted the streamer. It doesn't take long for the two to start arguing, and Hyung just turns his back to go on his way. He wanted to head to the sea first because to make the medicine they would need a fishing rod. Loper and the chat don't really understand this, as Hyung had only mentioned the bomb slimes. Suddenly a viewer named Cuckoo donates 1,000 won. While the chat mocked the situation, Hyung soon realizes that people couldn't understand his hint. Loper didn't know why they needed a fishing rod, and thought the medicine was in the sea. That thought is somewhat silly, but the protagonist leaves the answer open. The blonde even begins to wonder if his friend was lying and cries, wanting to turn off the stream. Then Hyung reassures his friend and asks to borrow 70,000 gold. Loper didn't quite understand this request, and the viewers thought it was a scam. Observing the place from above, Hyung noticed that more people had arrived. The blonde guy still hadn't understood why they needed a fishing rod, nor did he care about his gold. Finally, the two of them reached Eldrock, who had some hearing problems. Gradually, Hyung approached and started talking to the old man. After saying he wanted to buy his fishing rod, he received an out-of-context reply. The boy wanted to pay 50,000 gold for that equipment. Without hesitating, the old man bluntly asked for 100,000 up front. Soon, Hyung realized that the old man hadn't changed a bit and offered 60. Then, the two of them got into a discussion to reach an agreement. Finally, the old man gave up and ended up yielding to the protagonist's cunning. Then, Hyung started celebrating quite happily and the old geezer told him to leave. Suddenly, Loper commented that Hyung was born to be a streamer, leaving him confused. And he had realized this the moment the saga to complete the quest began. With that, the blonde guy suggested his friend do some role-playing, but Hyung wasn't really into it. While showing the sensitivity of the bomb slimes to a follower, Loper exploded several of them. At that moment, the viewers wondered how the fishing rod would help with the quest. With a meticulous analysis, Hyung found the perfect height. The sensitivity of the fishing rod was a bit different from a real one, and he needed to adjust it. Just when he was finally about to start the process, Hyung was called by his friend. The blonde guy informed him that there were people following them. Hyung already suspected that several teams were after them right after they left the city, so he asked to borrow the screen settings window. He soon came to the conclusion that he would need to adjust that. Hyung had always loved fantasy since he was young, but during his time in the army no one liked that kind of thing. When he was bored, he would always read the same book until a new recruit arrived. Wasting no time, Hyung went to the rookie to ask if he knew that novel. Unexpectedly, the recruit answered in the affirmative. Even though he had already read the book dozens of times, that rookie showed him details he had never noticed before. Soon, Hyung became fascinated by the recruit, because it was as if he had entered that world. Time passed, and when he saw that role-playing advertisement, he already knew everything. If he played with this guy, the experience would probably be legendary. Out of nowhere, Loper informed him that only his screen was being broadcasted at that moment. For now, Hyung wanted to act as if they were solely focused on the slime, so the blonde guy tried to entertain the chat while the black dragon was setting up the screen. For Hyung, it was frustrating to watch everything only from Hyung's perspective. He was probably anxious that other competitors were getting closer. The observation of the groups following them probably wouldn't last long. Then Hyung heard some footsteps and turned around to look. He soon noticed the arrival of the impatient ones who had jumped the gun. Without hesitating, he began his preparation, wielding the fishing rod and immediately charged at the shameless guys, using it as a weapon. Hyung had bought that object from the old man because its hook was special. That thing had such a fine tip that the bomb slimes didn't react to it, and when the user pressed a button, spikes would shoot out from the tip of the hook, giving the possibility of explosive control over the caught slimes. Utilizing this benefit, Hyung managed to throw a bomb at the enemy's feet. This made the leader order the retreat of the entire team. Suddenly, he realized that it was actually raining slimes, and this made all the shameless guys run away in fear. While Loper tried to protect himself, unavoidable explosions occurred all over the place. That incredible solution of Hyung's would take care of the stream snipers for a while. Now he could finally start the real work. Then the protagonist hooked a differently colored bomb slime and put it inside a bag. Soon, the boy celebrated the fact that he had gathered the necessary material for the quest. If almost all the bomb slimes in a place were killed, there was a high chance that the remaining ones would become defective, and that one was a good example of this. The quest couldn't be completed just by doing that, and Hyung was merely showing the steps to his friend. But the path wouldn't be that easy, and they needed to go to Asura. The employee from the RP department was a bit tired at that moment after the events. He had already understood that the Black Dragon wasn't just any ordinary noob. The beginner probably had a wealthy company backing him, since he was such a good player. Kim didn't understand why this prodigy boy was hanging around with a random. Perhaps this was a distraction to draw attention away from what the Vanguard had found. Anyway, the employee would need to finish Atsubul's quest first. Finishing this task alone would complete his quota for the month. However, Kim was unable to reach this goal. At that moment, the blonde girl was frightened by the disgusting medicine brought by Hyung. He had no idea how awful that concoction looked. Then Atsubul informs him that she would reward him with money and tells him to leave. After that, Hyung says that she was desperate, and this remark makes her furious. The boy had touched upon a sensitive subject without even knowing it. Suddenly, Hyung shoves the spoon into the girl's mouth, forcing her to swallow the medicine. Then an awkward atmosphere settles in while she tasted the concoction. Loper's expression already showed his opinion about his friend's trashy attitude. Hyung had forced Atsubul to swallow the disgusting stuff, and she couldn't keep it down in her stomach, so she starts vomiting due to the immediate effects. Suddenly, she charges at the protagonist, extremely angry. According to him, the seed that had come out was the cause of the illness. Atsubul couldn't seem to believe she had thrown up the root of the problem. She was also sick, and Hyung had realized it the moment he saw her. Atsubul had probably been suffering in silence for a long time, afraid of making her mother worry. Furthermore, there was the possibility of people like Julio using the illness against her. It was somewhat obvious how Hyung had found out about all this. Atsubul had swallowed a parasitic seed that grew in the south and lodged itself in her stomach. The girl probably contracted it by eating imported ingredients from that region, and the bomb slime was the only thing capable of removing it. For this reason, the slime that didn't explode due to being defective was necessary for the cure. Without its explosive properties, it only left behind mucus and the vomit-inducing toxin. Since it wasn't a real illness, she only needed to vomit the seed to be cured. Now that Atsubul was cured, she wouldn't need that medicine anymore and should take it to her mother. It was clear to Hyung that even though it was a game, the girl hadn't changed at all. She still cared more about the suffering of others than her own. Despite being a bit harsh, Atsubul never stopped helping anyone. Hyung sincerely wished from the bottom of his heart that his friend would find happiness. Entering the cutscene, the girl can be seen handing the medicine to her mother. A small spoonful was already enough to cure the old woman. When the woman finally swallows the slime, Atsubul can hardly believe it had worked. After that, she reports to the boys that huge seeds came out of her mother. Now Atsubul wanted to take revenge on the doctors who had deceived her for a long time. It had been a long time since Hyung last saw that girl smile. She thanked him emotionally, while the chat drooled over her beauty. Even Loper was emotional about that recovery, while Hyung looked at the panel. Since Atsubol and her mother were saved thanks to the boys, she had to reward them. Thus she hands over the spellbook they had been looking for, and Hyung sincerely thanks her. Loper is fascinated by the object, but the protagonist doesn't let anyone touch it, and already shows a desire to set off on the next mission. Suddenly, Atsubol informs them that she had more gifts to give the boys. She then hands over a very heavy bag of gold. She was giving out more rewards than usual, and Loper is quite happy about it. According to the system, the first clear reward would be granted now. With this, the amount of gold is adjusted to the maximum limit. Furthermore, more attribute points and XP are applied. The players are also rewarded with 5 more levels. And Atsubol's spellbook jumps from the heroic to the unique grade. Hyung couldn't seem to believe it and looked in fascination at the brightly shining object. The protagonist thought it would be enough, as long as Atsubol was happy. After seeing the phrase "first to clear," a thought came to his mind, and that probably couldn't be fixed. Loper didn't even know there was a possibility of something like that happening. He was quite impressed with that so-called first clear reward. So he asks his friend to say something to the viewers. Loper tried to calm the crowd down at that moment, because not even Hyung knew about it. He didn't know what to do because the chat was moving too fast, and he couldn't even see what they were saying. Suddenly, Atsubol hands one more thing to the protagonist. With that, he feels flattered to receive yet another gift. Hyung had unlocked yet another achievement for being the first to help Atsubol. That piece of paper was a letter of introduction to the blacksmith in case the boy needed a weapon. Atsubol had already noticed that they didn't have decent defensive equipment in good condition. According to Hyung, the bad smell was from the slimes, and the girl had been forced to eat the stuff. Finally, Atsubol thanks them again and puts herself at the boy's disposal. Now there was nothing specific for the duo to do, and since it was an open world, they could go anywhere. Starting in Edlin was the same for everyone, but after that they had a high degree of freedom. However, the player needed to be careful not to get into trouble. After a customization suggestion, Loper leaves Hyung somewhat thoughtful. The blonde had spent 5 hours straight customizing himself to look flashier. In the game, there was also the possibility of changing genders, and this fooled a lot of people. Then Hyung realizes he had to decide the duo's next destination alone. Suddenly, he hears a very familiar sound. It was a user donating 50,000 won, and saying they wanted to see Atsubol angry. Loper immediately becomes euphoric and thanks Respectace for the donation. Since they would split all the earnings, each of them had made 25,000 won. But unexpectedly, this first donation triggers a sequence of other large deposits. One of them reached 100,000 won, and the blonde's eyes sparkled at these amounts. The view count was insane, and had surpassed 8,000 people on the live stream. Just for completing a quest, thousands of people had shown up. Hyung, looked a bit shy, merely thanked them for the donations, while Loper couldn't sit still. All the deposits totaled around 500,000, and 50% of that amount belonged to the protagonist. Suddenly, the blonde starts doing a ridiculous gratitude dance, leaving everyone embarrassed. Just for completing a quest, the outcome was incredible, and if it continued like this, Hyung could make a lot of money. He could finally achieve his financial goals. The goddess had once shown him the flow of time in reality. In that place, his mother had given up her life just to find him, and because of that, he wanted to make her happy. Loper soon asks his friend to use the spellbook, as the crowd was anxious. Finally, Hyung begins to open the amulet, and it doesn't take long for the fireball attack to appear on an info panel. That was very anticlimactic and could almost be considered a cheat. Loper was euphoric about it, and felt sensations that not even Hyung could feel. But suddenly the protagonist states that he felt it too after a slight delay. It seemed that he had literally absorbed the magic, as if reflecting what he had learned in the other world. Thus Hyung realizes what they meant by an existing character there for the first time. Out of nowhere, Loper yells at the boy to use it right away because the viewers were waiting. The first target would be a rock right in front of him. Hyung needed to focus his thoughts on his hand. After a brief sigh, he uses the fireball power, causing a colossal explosion in the area. Loper watched everything in awe and thought it was quite incredible. Even at rank 1, that was more than Hyung expected from the skill. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something that makes his eyes widen. A new effect had been unlocked at that moment. That seemed familiar to the boy, who enters a kind of optical illusion for a few moments. Hyung's expression was one of sheer astonishment, and then a panel appears giving some information about the 55 times recorder, in addition to the keyword. Soon, the boy even grinds his teeth in sheer anger, as the damned goddess clearly had a hand in that. Hyung had no doubt that the woman was watching everything. Soon, his friend shows concern about the situation. Regardless, Loper wouldn't understand even if the protagonist explained it. So Hyung gives a brief excuse and asks his friend to test the skill as well. The blonde gets very excited about this, but the protagonist was merely curious. Without hesitation, Loper concentrates and uses the magnificent fireball, but unfortunately the result is not as expected. Thus, the blonde falls into despair and gets embarrassed by it. For him, it was difficult to farm magic proficiency, unlike his friend who reached the unique rank straight away. Loper was outraged by this injustice, while Hyung bragged about his power. People only thought about the unique rank, but the difference in proficiency must have been huge along with it. With that, Hyung says that Loper understood magic completely wrong. You couldn't use magic with a single click, and that could be the fault of the Julio grimoire. But the problem lay in an even more fundamental place. Incantations and mana management had to be calculated, and the difference in rank wasn't everything. Magic proved to be very useful, but Hong didn't plan on making it his main power. After all the explanation, Loper asks if his friend had created the character the day before. Meanwhile, the chat was mocking the protagonist's decision. There are so many messages that Hong gets angry and starts arguing with the viewers. Loper then tries to cover his friend's mouth in an attempt to calm him down. Suddenly, the two receive a good donation and stop with that tension. With that financial therapy, the duo quickly calmed down. Magically, Hong's anger vanished because he loved money. Then he asks if the chat wanted to know their next destination because he already had a place in mind. It had been a while since Hong last stepped foot in that place, and he wouldn't follow the main quest as Plan A because he needed to acquire some skills first. Then the two friends entered the shop. That place always gave Loper the creeps. Soon, the hunter Leichner notices the presence of the new customers. Wasting no time, Hong informs him that he came to learn how to use a bow. Upon hearing this, the guy roughly drops his axe and asks if the kid had enough balls yet. The protagonist audaciously answers him in the affirmative. To pass Leichner's test quest, Hong needed to reach the minimum score and would earn rewards for doing so. Without hesitation, the boy asks the teacher a few questions, and he confirms the rules. Worried about the test, Loper suggests that he invest some points in agility beforehand. Regardless, Hong was very confident, and it didn't take long for him to shoot his first arrow. Due to his lack of agility, the result isn't good, but even so, he managed to get something useful out of it. Loper then leaves his friend to it, and stops giving his opinions to pay attention to the next attempts. On his second try, Hong gets a good score and leaves his friend in disbelief. The boy's foresight with each attempt was unbelievable. By hitting the maximum score countless times, he quickly reaches the points needed to pass the test. It was a moment where Hong achieved something that should have been impossible with just level 2 equipment. A little further away, a girl was quite bored because she wanted worthy opponents. Suddenly, she notices the arrival of a duo at the location and calls them idiots. Loper was skipping as he walked, which made his friend rather uncomfortable. He was overjoyed and couldn't stop expressing his feelings. That had been amazing, and even made Loper think that Hong had used a bow before. The blonde guy was quite enthusiastic because at that pace they would get rich in no time. Just in case, he made a bet with the chat, especially since no one imagined the protagonist having such skill with a bow. Loper wanted to do more things like this from time to time with his friend, and without hesitation he asks what their next destination would be. Hong wanted to take him to learn fencing, but first he needed to acquire speed, as it would be essential for that activity. However, Loper thought this skill was useless, and the protagonist would have to change his mind. That NPC was named Rhea, and people avoided her skill due to the high difficulty of the quest required to obtain it. Loper had his doubts about whether his very confident-looking friend could pull it off. Then Haim takes a step forward and gets very close to the NPC. He then informs her that he wants to learn the best thing she has to teach. The woman agrees to this but suddenly steals the boy's coin pouch and backs away from them. She then informs them that there is a fee of 5,000 to teach them. Rhea is surprised to see that Hyung didn't react and genuinely wanted to be taught. Throughout the countless cycles, that woman had already stolen a lot, so that alone was getting off cheap. The girl made a point of making it clear that she didn't like the protagonist, and so she begins the lesson by challenging him to catch her. Haim would need to find the teacher who had fled within the time limit to get the desired reward. That quest was nearly impossible, and the kid would need 5 different attempts. During that time, he wouldn't be able to do other quests, much less log out of the game. Loper doubted that Hyung would be able to catch Rhea, but the boy was determined. Since he needed help, he decides to ask for assistance from Atsubel, who was related to the target. Leeing, the boy justified that he knew this information just like everyone else. Fortunately, with that excuse, the blonde agrees to help him. They were sisters, and once again, Haim lies to Loper about how he figured it out. The chat doubts all of this, but the protagonist cleverly tries to persuade them. According to him, the viewer's lack of attention and misguided attitudes had obscured the truth. After that, Haim stops arguing and accompanies his friend in search of Rhea. Meanwhile, the girl was chilling out, playing with a cute cat. She thought the duo had given up on the quest and would never find her there. But suddenly, her sister arrives at the scene, leaving her surprised by her company. Rhea even breaks into a cold sweat upon seeing Atsubel's companions. She even tries to invalidate the boy's achievement, but she herself had said that anything goes in this quest. Soon, Atsubel calls her sister over for a talk, as she had already advised her to stop stealing. The blonde then scolds the little thief, who would only learn her lesson when she finally got arrested. After scolding her sister, Atsubel asks her to head to the store once she is finished. Rhea simply replies in the affirmative, while Haim thanks his friend. The protagonist had achieved an unprecedented feat, and since a promise should always be kept, Rhea hands him the quest reward. The rewards were scaled according to the task's completion time, which is why Haim receives another unique rarity skill book. With that, the girl walks away, making it clear she never wants to see the protagonist again. Suddenly, an exhausted Lopper arrives, celebrating that he has finally found his friend. He is surprised to see that the result of all that walking was yet another unique grade item. Wasting no time, Heim confirms that it is finally time to learn swordsmanship. That book was a consumable item, something the protagonist could never quite get used to. At that moment, the viewers wanted to know why Heim chose to learn the speed skill. The boy quickly uses a simple sprint as an example to justify his choice, though to Lopper, the skill was practically unnoticeable during RP. To him, not even the unique grade made a difference, but Heim remained steadfast in his decision. Since the protagonist had mentioned wanting to learn swordsmanship, Lopper insists on trying to teach him, despite not knowing much himself. Heim then asks for the chat's opinion on the matter, which makes Lopper quite uncomfortable. It seemed that most players, including Jan, were following a similar progression path, likely because of the guide. No one had been able to complete Atsubel's quest before due to Yu Leo's scam, which prevented any interaction with the girl. Normally the blonde would be taken away and never seen again, while Ria would become completely useless. Therefore, the fact that Heim managed to break this cycle was a sign that he was on the right track, and he would certainly be able to beat the RP in his own unique way. He didn't know what the goddess was thinking, but he no longer wanted to be her puppet. After walking for quite a while, Heim realized that the hermit swordsman lived very far away. They finally arrive at the location and announce their desire to learn swordsmanship. Realizing he has visitors, the man simply glares at them with a chilling look that leaves Lopper terrified. After finishing his drink, the swordsman Balder finally stands up. He immediately orders them to swing their swords until told to stop. They were also allowed to use the training area right behind them. Since they were there to learn swordsmanship, words were unnecessary. Without hesitation, Hyun drops his iron sword on the ground and wields the wooden one instead. It usually took people a long time to complete both stages of the quest. Many failed because they thought it would be easy, only to have reality hit them hard in the end. Lopper was certain that skill-teaching NPCs were capable of killing players. A bet then starts in the chat regarding how long it will take Hyun to complete the quest, with a substantial amount of money on the line. Lopper gets euphoric about this and quickly lets his friend know that the task is now worth 800,000 won. The protagonist immediately takes a deep breath and focuses. The most important aspect of swinging the wooden sword wasn't the rep count or the time spent. First of all, Balder never expected much skill from beginner swordsmen. However, most players assumed that a sword was the easiest weapon to use, and to Balder, witnessing that mindset could be highly insulting. The man simply wanted a sincere attitude toward the blade. After staring at the boy for a short while, he raises his hand and states that he has seen enough. A happy expression appears on Hyung's face as he realizes his strategy has worked. Suddenly, a system panel appears with a quest to defeat Balder in a duel, marking Phase 2. Lopper panics upon realizing that this doesn't mean the task was successfully completed yet. Seeing that he had lost the first bet, one user offers a double or nothing wager. Hyung asks his friend if he is really going to accept that proposal. If the protagonist managed to block the enemy 4 times, he would win double the amount. However, if he failed, he would have to go bungee jumping in real life with Lopper. At the boy's current proficiency level, pulling that off could prove quite difficult. Lopper was terrified, as he had an extreme fear of heights. Suddenly, Hyun gives him a highly skeptical look. The protagonist then reassures his friend that he wouldn't have to jump, telling him to just trust the process. Suddenly, the sword god adds 1,000,000 won to the quest reward and praises their friendship. Hyun can hardly believe the amount of money he is making in the game. With that, he begins to stare Balder down with a fearless expression. Without much delay, the two grip their swords firmly and prepare for combat. The aura surrounding Balder's weapon is striking, and he finally charges right at the protagonist. Hyun grows a bit nervous upon realizing that the fight is genuinely underway. The boy then raises his sword to defend against his opponent's first strike. At that moment, Lopper and the viewers were in disbelief at Balder's fierce attack. The immense effort Hyun made to block that strike was evident on his face, but admirably he manages to withstand it. Balder seems displeased by the boy's feat and is already preparing a new assault. Regardless, Hyun was in position waiting for the next blow. It doesn't take long for Balder to charge at him, and once again the boy blocks his attempt. Then the protagonist realizes that his sense of movement was poor due to the equipment's synchronization rate, but on the other hand, he had learned to use agility as a tactic. Balder soon notices that the boy had a lot on his mind. It was probably due to his composure or the unexpected situation he was in. After hearing this, Hyun replies to him in a tone of extreme mockery. Then Balder comments that the boy got the wrong idea about him and decides to finish this quickly. Once again, Hyun mocks the big guy and they begin a frantic exchange of blows. The protagonist was struggling too much to hold off his enemy. Lopper wondered why a simple fencing quest was so difficult. Thanks to his friend, he had managed to narrowly dodge a strike that would have been fatal. At that moment, the chat was commenting on the performance of the fight. Balder was probably getting anxious because the protagonist was holding out longer than expected. Thus, he charges at Hyun once more. And fortunately, the boy manages to block his attack again, leaving him with a look of disbelief. Hyun had already noticed that the enemy's movements had become wider, so they step back and stare at each other for a few moments. This gives the boy time to rest and think about how the strikes were getting more dangerous. But it doesn't take long for them to start fighting again. Once again, Balder's sinister aura would clash with the little boy's willpower. Once more, he manages to defend against the big guy's attack. But unfortunately, his sword begins to weaken, until it can't take it anymore and shatters, leaving him completely defenseless. Balder couldn't seem to believe what he was seeing, and from the ground, the boy bragged about having managed to block his attacks 4 times in a row. In that instant, Haim celebrated having managed to complete the quest. The chat didn't quite understand, as no one had won that fight yet. This duel ended because the wooden sword broke, even without a winner. Haim was already anxious to receive his payment after Loper ended the stream and did the proper calculations. The blonde guy assured him that he would make the transfer properly without ripping the boy off. Suddenly, Loper brings up the topic of when they first met, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. He wanted to know what Haim did before joining the army. The protagonist tried to come up with some excuses while the chat made guesses about it. Then Loper confirms that all the money from the quest would go straight to the Black Dragon. This was because he completed these quests using his pure physical ability. Because of this, he is happy not to have to go bungee jumping. Seeing that the kid had believed it, the chat mocks him, saying it was all a prank. Suddenly, a viewer donates 100,000 won to see the boy use his sword more. Soon, Haim looks back and notices Balder's presence. It looked like that man was fuming. Even while quiet, he was trying to contain his anger. Balder was probably blaming himself for having his movements read by a rookie like him. Then Haim asks if the duel was really over. Balder confirms this information and asks him to wait a bit. Thus, the boy notices that the guy was gritting his teeth to avoid showing emotions. It doesn't take long for Balder to return with a reward for his opponent. Now Haim had 4 well-developed skills. Soon the info panel appears with all his rewards plus a unique power. The chat couldn't seem to believe it, and one of the viewers even asked for private lessons. Suddenly, Hyung pulls his friend, asking him to show some reactions because the job hadn't been fully completed yet. Without delay, Loper says he would give some lessons to his followers, but he is immediately reprimanded. At that moment, Hyung calls Balder and questions the absence of something in the reward. After a few seconds of silence, he informs him that he heard his master move to Edlin, and if the boy happened to find him, he should hand that object over to the guy. He would surely listen to the words the protagonist had to say. According to Balder, the master was where the winds gathered, and this gives Hyung a clue, and because of this, he already summons his friend to return to the city together. Suddenly, a person sends a donation saying that Balder would have a lot of work that day. Loper, at that moment, was curious to know if they were going to the big guy's master, but Hyung, who looked quite tired, simply said he had decided to call it a day. He had to go to work, and not getting a good night's sleep would be a problem. So the protagonist started logging off the game, mentioning that he wouldn't be able to return right after finishing work. Returning to reality, the boy realized it was quite hot. He was sweaty, probably because he had focused so hard during the fencing quest. Suddenly, his phone started receiving some messages that caught his attention. It was Loper, letting him know that he would send the payment right before going to sleep. After that, it didn't take long for the deposit to hit the protagonist's account, and the amount was so high it startled him. The kid couldn't even believe the sheer volume of donations they had received in such a short time. This made him wonder if working a regular job was really worth it, considering he had only played for 10 hours. Hung was back in reality, but this time, he was seriously considering returning to that world. However, he ultimately concluded that he should keep streaming strictly as a simple hobby. Even so, the boy was worried about his friend who had been encouraging him to keep going. But there were no guarantees that the donations would always blow up like that. Getting a proper job would be better to give his mother some peace of mind. It would be good for the boy to show some filial love like this from time to time. With these thoughts, the boy fell asleep, only to wake up to his mother calling him. It was incredibly late, and because of this, she was visibly angry. Furthermore, she also questioned the enormous amount of money in his bank account. Hung was speechless for a few moments and just stared blankly at his mother. She suspected that her son was doing something behind her back during the night. She couldn't understand how the boy could have earned so much cash legitimately. She didn't even give him a chance to explain himself, assuming it all came from gambling. Finally, Hung managed to bring up the gift he had received from Hyun. He then explained that he was streaming the game, which was how he had earned a bit of money. The protagonist was certainly a good kid and wouldn't do anything illegal. His mother then said she wanted to talk to him after work, as he needed to get ready as well. After that, she started to leave the room, but the boy called out to her. She believed what he was saying and was only worried about it becoming a burden on him. Hung wanted his mother to never have to worry about carrying the burden of their debts alone again. He was determined to work hard so that she could live comfortably. The harsh reality of life was unlike anything Hyung had experienced in the other world, or so he thought, until he got his first scolding for sleeping on the job, which made him quite angry. As soon as Hyung arrived at the office, his subordinate handed him a stack of documents and left for an outside meeting. The contents were difficult, but they were well organized, so it didn't cause the boy much trouble. He was just about to start working when the team leader suddenly called him over. The guy had nicknamed him Trial Version, and would humiliate the boy over things completely unrelated to work. He then ordered the intern to go buy him a drink. By asking what kind of coffee he should get, the boy ended up making the rude man angry. When the boy returned to his seat with the coffee, the subordinate was getting scolded by the leader. With empty eyes, he listened to it all as if it were a daily occurrence, and then he slowly opened his mouth to say that it wouldn't be possible due to his current workload. The guy saw this as an affront, thinking that Manhwa was trying to pick and choose his work, and in an extremely arrogant manner he threw all the papers into the air. He started insulting the subordinate just as Hyung finally arrived with the coffee. It didn't take long for the two boys to start picking up the documents from the floor. The team leader glared fiercely at Hyung as if he knew the intentions behind his actions, and didn't hesitate to call the employees idiots. After finishing sorting out the documents, they returned to their seats, but Manhwa seemed to have a lot on his mind. Reflected in the monitor, his eyes looked emptier than usual. Suddenly he apologized to Hanbit for showing him such an ugly side of things. The protagonist was cool with it, figuring the team leader was probably just in a bad mood. The new project that the ignorant fool had given him was already in the works, but it required time, and the subordinate wouldn't be able to properly look out for the protagonist going forward, which was why he was apologizing. Upon hearing this answer, Hyung says he can help him in that regard. Then the workday ends, and upon getting off the bus, the protagonist hears someone calling him. It was Hyung asking how his day at work had been. The boy had only slept for 3 hours and immediately asks to go into the cafe so they could talk more comfortably. Upon sitting in the chair, Hyung simply melts from so much exhaustion. Corporate society was a pain for him, and his desire was to stream for hours cursing at his boss. Anyway, Hong just wanted to know the information his friend was going to share, and without delay, Yeon shows the messages they received after the stream, which included several important companies. The salary from one of these large corporations reached an incredible 100 million won. In Yeon's view, the best alternative was for his friend to choose a company to ally with, but upon looking at Yeon's face, he notices that something wasn't right. The protagonist was almost certain that his friend was lying, even if he were to deny it to the death. Joining a large corporation didn't seem beneficial to Hyung. Yeon hadn't suggested it with bad intentions, but his friend knew there were other feelings behind it all, and for that reason gives him some good, painful knocks on the head. After he stops getting beaten up, he notices several similarities between his friend and his uncle. Yeon only wanted Hyung to get a good job that paid him well. The protagonist was very grateful for this irresistible proposal, but wanted more transparency regarding his friend's priorities in that moment. Then Loper states that the RP didn't suit him. Searching for a high level of freedom and adventure sounded cool, but playing alone was harder than he imagined. And in his opinion, Hong was showing great promise in the RP. He just wanted to watch his friend's glorious moments, sharing everything with as many people as possible. And because of that, he wished to establish a channel agency centered around the protagonist. Instead of a normal company, this would be a sort of guild that combined the game and reality. And that was exactly what Yeon had mentioned in the army. But how he would make money was still not clear in Hyung's mind. Thus, Yeon explains that he would upload videos to the recorder and profit from the ads. And Hyung was very famous on the platform, with various top trending contents. People watching the boy would start playing RP, increasing the number of allies on this journey. That was Yeon's proposal, but Hyung was suspicious about the matter of this so-called company. Thus, it becomes clear that he would be a vice CEO of the institution and would stream autonomously, only with Yeon's help from time to time. After these clarifications, they finally reach an agreement. The reason Hyung accepted was because of his friend, but it would also be his last chance to reach airport. If he cleared the game and found this thing, he would probably know the reason why he had died so many times. Suddenly, Yeon's cell phone starts vibrating repeatedly. Several messages were already coming in again, and this was common in the life of a popular person. But something there ends up worrying the boy, who needs to make an urgent call. He was desperate because the person wasn't answering, and that left Hyung worried. All of this had to do with the Golden Bow Vanguard they had seen in Edlin. They were part of the advance party of a German company called Rashenhai. The information was that the reward for the Atsubal quest decreased according to the number of players who completed it, generating a monopoly. And in the community, rumors said that Hyung had schemed all of this. A guy was protesting against Rashten, Black Dragon, and Loper. Right at that moment, he claimed it was impossible to trust anyone in that world. His friend reprimanded him, telling him to be thankful for the good reward he had obtained. It was somewhat obvious, but he didn't understand the reason why the prize was better for whoever completed the quest first. That's why his friend had told him to act quickly. But now the slimes were no longer even visible. Anyway, the Black Dragon would have to explain himself that day to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, he thought about how big Rashten was. The players mirrored the greatness of the company, mainly for having a ranker archer, but nothing was impossible to resolve. And after thinking it through, Hong tells Yeon that they would delay the start of the stream a little. With that, he continues drinking his beverage as night falls. Upon opening a book, he gives a slight chuckle when finding the desired content. Then he decides to enter the world to take a look at a few things. Immediately, the protagonist remembers the location of a cave. As expected, the bomb slimes were there in abundance all around, and there was a reason why they gathered like that. Knowing this, it doesn't take long for Hyung to find the level 7 bomb slime king. That creature had the trait of attracting normal individuals, absorbing them, and growing in size. But there had to be another reason for the thing to attract so many of them like that. Upon observing the cave's ceiling more closely, the protagonist notices something shiny up there. It seemed to be monster bait, and it had the name Rarest written on it. That single-use item could be obtained from a dungeon in the north. Rarest had installed the bait in the cave where the Bomb Slime King was born, and the monster's trait combined with the amulet's effects causing all this mess, and because of that, it made sense that there was nothing left in the forest. Without hesitating, Hyung begins to use his fireball. Immediately, his power begins to take over the area. After a few moments, the giant slime is hit and consumed by the fire. With that, the system informs that the player has gained a series of benefits. At that moment, Hyung only wanted to know how many creatures had been lured to the area. The video that had been posted in the community became a highly discussed topic. In reality, the protagonist recorded it in the cave, and Hyun uploaded it anonymously. The video didn't include the part where he wiped out the bomb slimes, and naturally, the comments directed their insults at Rarest. Zintromber was an NPC that the boy found in the guidebook. This guy dug the cave where the Bomb Slime King was located, and was devastated to have his spot stolen. The speculation about the disappearance of the creatures and the existence of Zintromber made everything easier for the protagonist. The strangest part was that, while the guy's name was in the guidebook, there was no information about the cave. That book only showed the extent of an adventurer's knowledge. Various pieces of information were recorded, but their accuracy was ambiguous, with deviations from the truth. It seemed like a piece of the puzzle was intentionally left out of the guidebook, and because of that, Hyung questioned the true identity of Adventurer A. Everyone avoided using magic because of the proficiency system. According to the blonde guy, a person needed to maximize this power with extreme difficulty, to then learn the skill of the next branch. And for that reason, people chose a different path to follow. But for the Black Dragon, things were quite different. He would reach an incredible 100% proficiency in a single day. Lubber tried to fool himself into thinking this was just a late April Fool's joke, but Hong states that this was only for rank 1, to begin with. Even so, Loper demanded proof, since mastering any magic took at least a month. Soon after, the protagonist opens his status window, confirming everything he had said. The blonde guy seems unable to believe what he's seeing, and even falls to his knees. He thought this was impossible, and considered the possibility of it being an in-game bug. Then Hong explains that it wasn't his fault, as things just happened naturally. Furthermore, he asks his friend not to mention this proficiency thing on the livestream, because he was planning to show them something quite interesting. And all of that had something to do with the villains from Rarest. Finally, a new livestream begins, and Loper welcomes the viewers who were demanding explanations for the delay. Without hesitating, he explains the reason for the broadcast delay, and states that the duo had no ties whatsoever with Rarest. On that promising day, the Black Dragon was going to do something before finding Baldur's master. At this exact moment, he received the news that Leah had run away again. The girl really wouldn't listen to a single word. Atsopsol said. Hyung tries to understand the young girl's side and reassures his friend. She genuinely hoped that they would be able to live together without fighting at some point. After being questioned, the protagonist expresses his desire to learn the next magic skill, and with just a single request, he gets Atsopsol's approval, leaving the chat euphoric. Without much delay, the girl hands the second magic book to the protagonist. Soon after, the information panel appears, detailing the next quest and its rewards. Upon holding the book, Hyung notices something outside that catches his attention. The warriors were watching everything through the window with great curiosity. Thus, the protagonist finally begins to open the book. Suddenly, a massive amount of aura starts flowing from the amulet, and the panel pops up, listing the various benefits Hyung was receiving at that moment. Loper is left utterly shocked upon seeing that the Black Dragon ranked up and learned the fire explosion skill. According to Atsubal, if Hyung ever got stuck, he should try heading to the magic research laboratory in the city of Ifrit. And after thanking the girl, he finally makes his way out of the establishment. Upon opening the door, the duo comes face to face with a crowd of people. Roshan was also there, which made Loper a little afraid. In the midst of all those people, a guy was staring intently at the protagonist. Regardless, the two of them continue walking in his direction. Haim then mocks him, telling the dude to fix his scary expression. He hoped everything would go well, but he was curious to see how the story would unfold. By that point, the crowd had already entered the establishment and was pestering Atsuba for a magic book. Loper soon comments that those guys were really shameless. Haim agrees, as it wasn't hard to notice their greed. Loper still didn't understand what his friend wanted to show him, growing more confused with every word that came out of his mouth. Inside the shop, the weirdo organized the crowd to open their books at the same time. Thus, the countdown begins while the duo observes everything from the outside. And finally, on the count of 3, everyone opens the items at the exact same time. Haim is happy about this, as it was finally time for the show to begin. Then suddenly, all the books catch fire for no apparent reason. Not even the chat could figure out that bizarre event. Desperate people tried in vain to put out the fire with wind magic. Meanwhile, Atsuba was furious to see the entire store in flames, and it doesn't take long for her to kick all those idiots out of her shop. They were going to burn to ashes, and that was exactly what Haim had been talking about. Suddenly, a guy announces that the quest reward had changed. The system made it clear that the rewards had decreased, even though no one had learned the new skill. Upon questioning his friend, the weirdo discovers that no one had succeeded. After thinking for a moment, the ranker shooter decides to approach the duo. Regardless, Haim didn't seem intimidated by his presence, and soon the shooter states that he wants to have a little chat with him.